Alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today and I'm bringing you another Dragon Ball Z segment. But this isn't your ordinary Dragon Ball Z segment. This is a segment covering the pilot episode of Dragon Ball Z Light of Hope, a fan-made series created by Robot Underdog 2 that is based off of the history of Trunks and the entire future arc depicting the apocalyptic world created by the androids. This topic was requested by Ronnie, also known as Karen WPSU, who wanted me to review the first episode. Let me quickly mention that there will be spoilers in this episode, so if you haven't seen it yet, I will give you 5 seconds to pause the video, look it up in the description, and open it in a new tab. So, now that you have gone through the longest 5 seconds of your life, let's get straight into this video as I will discuss the plot, special effects, action, character usage, and my expectations moving forward. So let's begin with the plot. Now, most of us, if not all of us, are familiar with the future Trunks story arc. Well, there really is no difference plot-wise as this episode focuses on introducing us to the 5 main characters that will be featured, including Gohan, who is played by Anton Bex, Android 18, who is played by Amy Johnston, Android 17, who is played by Tyler Tackett, Bulma, who is played by Ruthin Thompson, and finally Jack Wald, who plays future Trunks. They did a great job breaking down the apocalyptic world that Trunks lives in by showing the destroyed cities and, most importantly, the evil sadistic androids that terrorize the earth. Speaking of the androids, watching both Android 17 and 18 in live action captures a dark feeling that the animation could never grab. We have seen Cell, Frieza, Boo, and other villains killing people all the time, but watching the androids blast civilians for fun was chilling, especially the childlike Android 17. There was a weird twist when he called himself immortal, however, which contrasts the series where we see Android 18 age. Either way, the climax of this episode is a parallel to the history of Trunks, where we see Gohan and Trunks fighting 17 and 18, and I will talk more about the action later on. We also saw huge correlations to the fight in the history of Trunks with Gohan and the androids, except for the fact that he didn't lose his arm, and both he and Trunks were not severely injured to the point where they used a sensu bean. Either way, even though I'm a bit biased in rating the plot because the future Trunks story arc is my favorite arc in the entire series, I give the plot a solid 5 stars. Moving on to special effects, I have to grade on a curve. For a fan-funded film, the special effects were sensational. Also, live-action Dragon Ball Z fights will never look the same as the show, since there are things that you can do with animation that just don't look as good with live action. But all jokes aside, the effects were great. It's sad how a fan-funded film had better special effects than Dragon Ball Evolution, and I'm not kidding. If 20th Century Fox was funding this film or a major TV company like AMC, it would obviously look better, but with what they had, I think the special effects deserve a solid 5 stars. I was blown away by the effects that they used for Gohan's Super Saiyan transformation, in addition to the energy blast effects, although the energy blast looked more like fire instead of the energy blast that we're accustomed to seeing in Dragon Ball Z. But that goes back to what I said about the live action scenes as a whole in terms of comparing them with the animation. Their flying sequences and the remnants of the capsule technology also had pretty solid effects as well. So I give this episode a 5 stars in terms of special effects for their limited resources. Now, for Dragon Ball Z, you cannot make a review without covering action. To be honest, the episode was only 12 minutes and there are only 2 action scenes. It was the fight against the androids and Gohan's training sequence with Trunks at the beach, similar to in the history of Trunks itself. As far as the android fight goes, wow is the first word that comes to mind. This part of the episode blew me away like the Spirit Bomb did to Kid Buu. I was shocked by how impressive and exciting the fighting scenes actually were. When Gohan turned Super Saiyan, it just increased the level of intensity for the fight itself, and similar to the history of Trunks, Trunks starts struggling against Android 18 and Gohan eventually jumps in. But the noise of the fight captured a perfect feeling of how I envisioned a Dragon Ball Z fight in real life. As far as the Gohan and Trunks training sequence goes, It was a rather light scene as Gohan was holding back, but it didn't really disappoint, and we actually saw a glimpse of the next episode where we actually see them training more as compared to what we actually saw in this episode. They did a good job of portraying how Trunks felt in the anime being so weak to fight against the androids, but they didn't really mention becoming a Super Saiyan as much. Actually, they didn't mention it at all. And in this episode, it is clearly based off of the history of Trunks and not in the manga, where we actually see Trunks was already a Super Saiyan when he was training with future Gohan, which I think makes the story a little bit less dramatic in the manga as compared to the history of Trunks, where the story was much more dramatic. But I cannot possibly give the action anything less than 5 stars. In terms of character usage, for people who don't even know Dragon Ball Z, in just 12 minutes this film paints the perfect picture. Now, they may not understand Goku dying of a heart virus, but I think they did a great job simplifying the characters for all audiences to understand, from casual to hardcore viewers. With that said, this episode really only contained the 5 main cast members and background characters, such as scientists and random civilians. However, as the first episode, I cannot be critical on focusing in on a small amount of characters, especially in an apocalyptic world where most people are dead anyways. I will mention my opinions on the cast though. I believe that Anton Bex did a great job portraying the stern personality of future Gohan. Ruthin Thompson did a solid job playing Bulma but was barely seen, but captured Bulma in her limited time on screen. And 17 and 18 were perfect. Their deep blue eyes were also a nice touch added to the character usage. Also, Android 17's fascination with guns was also really good, as it was directly taken from the anime where he was going to shoot the old man, and also from the manga where he actually flat out shot the old man. 17 killing the man early in this episode showed a correlation with the manga, which was a lot more dark in nature. As for Android 18, I feel like the actor had a great resemblance to 18 from the actual series itself. My only gripe with this episode was Trunks, and I say this only because I feel like the actor is a bit too young. In the history of Trunks, Trunks was actually 13, and he was actually closer to 14 considering the fact that he was a baby 13 years prior to the android threat, and I feel like Jack Wald at 10 is just a bit too young. With an older actor, I feel like the series could be a little bit more mature. However, Wald did a solid job acting, so I credit him for that. For what it's worth, the character usage gets a solid 5 stars for what they managed to do in just a simple mere 12 minutes. Hell, this video may end up even being longer than 12 minutes after I'm done editing it. For my future expectations, I'm curious to see how they diverge the plot. 2 major questions include whether or not they will have future Gohan lose his arm, and the second is whether or not future Gohan will die. That's the biggest question, and the reason I say this is because Blackenfist and I agree, along with most Dragon Ball Z fans, that future Gohan dying is the saddest moment in the entire series for both the manga and the anime, and they hint at it possibly happening when he told Trunks about the pain of loss. Also, considering the fact that future Trunks had an older, more mature voice at the beginning, leads me to believe that there will be a time gap implying future Gohan's death. As much as I love future Gohan as a character, this show cannot impact us the same without him dying, as that truly captures the history of Trunks and Trunks' future as a whole. In addition, what I find interesting is Bulma has good progress on the time machine in this episode, as compared to the history of Trunks where we really saw her progress 3 years after Gohan had died. Trunks was curious about what she was doing, and she didn't tell him, which is very different from what originally happened, as it was implied that Trunks actually helped her build it to some degree. This scene displays Trunks being treated even more as an oblivious child, but that's not something major. I'm also curious to see what other survivors are around and if they will also be involved in the story itself. But those are just my expectations. The replay value on this episode would get 5 stars too, but for a 12-minute episode I didn't feel that this category was big enough to expand on, even though I have seen this 5 times already. I do want to point out something really quickly too, that I felt that the music was slightly unfitting, but that's just being a little picky. Overall, this pilot episode of Light of Hope was great. It was way better than I ever thought a fan-made series could be, and I'm looking forward to see the next one. The name is interesting too, as Hope was written on Trunks' time machine, and his time machine was yellow, representing the generic color for light, symbolic of the time machine itself. I can't wait to see what the time machine will eventually look like. I'll close this video out by saying if you want to support them, they have a blue donating support tab, exactly as how mine's is on my channel to the right of their page. If you want to donate to them in addition to their own website, I will personally contribute $100 to them for their hard work and determination. But donating isn't all, guys. Spreading the word is our job as Dragon Ball fans to make their project known from one fan to another. Rhymestyle, Thundershot, Blackenfist, and the rest of the Dragon Ball Z community will also help contribute to this. But most importantly, over everything else, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys. And remember that light of hope isn't good. It is great! Now that you have gone through the longest 5 seconds of your life, let's get straight into this video as I will discuss the plot, special effects, action, character usage, and my expectations moving forward.